Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the third and last day of Madrid Platform, the first international hub between Europe and Latin America, here at the wonderful Cibeles Palace. And right now we are in the auditorium. We've had 3 very busy days, and the agenda is packed with interesting content. And I will very briefly remind you of some housekeeping issues. We're streaming all these talks, and I'm going to thank all the people who are following us from around the world. I think from 13 countries. I will ask Carlos to verify. And I would like to briefly remind you that you have an official hashtag, as you've been doing. And I know it's very active in Twitter in particular, and in all social media, hashtag Madrid Platform. And also, I think it's interesting to give you a voice through the social media, considering that this is one of the top events of 2021, with a hybrid modality. And we start this last day with the International Forum on urban mobility and smart cities, and we will talk about urban mobility, public-private partnership, regulation, and to that, I insist, I will start and open this first forum with opening remarks. I would like to invite Adolfo Ramírez Escudero, President of CBRE Spain, and Alfonso Vegara, CEO and founder from Metrópoli Foundation. Please give them a round of applause. We would like to invite them to the stage. Thank you very much. They are now taking their seats, and I think that before we start with them, we have a video.
A lot has happened in 20 years. We have elevated businesses, carved out natural havens, and become more globally connected. We redesigned overlooked spaces into cultural meeting points and embraced the mobility of the future. A lot can happen in 20 years. Who better to imagine the future than those who will live in it?
I imagine a city with giant trees growing on buildings.
I imagine going to school with a flying skateboard.
And the sky is full of flying cars.
Imagine a city inspired by and made for future generations. Imagine a great city project. One that revitalizes our public spaces, inspires the professionals of tomorrow, and prioritizes the health and well-being of our community. A project built on sustainability and powered by digital transformation. A project that redefines how we move and connect. Imagine a place more livable, more competitive, a place where people thrive and businesses prosper. There's no better canvas than Madrid. A place that embraces ambition and connection, where we are open, resourceful, and make the most of life. Close to our community, yet close to the world. Proud of our achievements, yet aware of our potential. Imagine a project where opportunity comes to life. Imagine it for Madrid. Imagine it for yourself. Madrid, a city made for life.
Bueno, pues muy buenos días.
Good morning, everyone. It's a great way to start with this video, don't you think? Oh, now we fixed the audio issue that we had. Good morning, everyone. Good morning to all of you who are connected online. And I would like to start, of course, I would like to by thanking Madrid platform for this initiative that is a perfect excuse for talking about something that we love, which is cities, right, Alfonso? And I loved starting with this aspirational video that invites us to imagine an ambitious city, a city where we can live, where we can work, where we can strive as society. And I think we'll start, first of all, by welcoming you. Good morning. Well, thank you. I'm delighted that an initiative like this, like Madrid Platform, is organized. It's spectacular to create in Madrid this junction between Europe and Latin America. I think this has a great potential, not only for cities, but for many other areas. But this is an initiative that will bring great joy to the city of Madrid. Well, it has to do a lot with the association. In the end, cities are the perfect forum or the perfect excuse to work as an association. And on top of that, cities collaborate but also compete amongst each other. And also, what we want is to become a focal point for attracting talent. But today we will talk about mobility and smart cities, which is the topic that we want to address. Alfonso and I know each other have known each other for a very long time, and we share why cities grow, why some of them thrive and some don't. Alfonso is an eminence. He's been working on this for years. With, well, humbly as the largest consultancy company in the company with presence in great cities, have a lot of information. And working as a team, we decided just before the pandemic to start thinking and reflecting upon the way in which we could collaborate. And then COVID came and we all had to go home. And as all of us, as all of you probably also, we all had to reinvent after overcoming our initial perplexity. And then we designed this initiative that has been very well illustrated with the video you just saw. It's a fantastic video. And in that initiative we said, why don't we put all our knowledge into a hypothesis of how Madrid could be in 30 years, how we could imagine this city. And it's something that no one asked us to do, but it's something that we wanted to communicate and share with all of those who have something to say in the city of Madrid in this case. And of course, one of the essential aspects of this Madrid for the future is mobility. And to start landing on the subject, and after you just saw what Madrid Life is, and after talking about it with many representatives of the Madrid society, and talking about mobility, how do you see Madrid with respect to other cities in terms of the potential for urban mobility solutions? Well, we see all the innovations in Paris, what is intended to be done in Barcelona or in Nordic cities. Almost all innovative solutions have to do either with mobility or with innovation and attracting talent or social integration. Cities, in particular large cities, were seen as the center and the suburbs. There was a very well-communicated and resourceful city center, and there were other areas that were outside this city center with different characteristics. And so I think social integration is essential for the sustainability and the competitiveness of cities. No city will have economic success unless they tackle other areas such as environment or social integration. There's economic development, environmental sustainability, and society. Unless we have three areas covered, it's going to be very difficult to strive. And there's another thing, and this is where Madrid for Life came from, the idea that there are cities with projects and cities without projects. And not many cities in the world have a clear vision of how they want to be in the future. But when there's one that gives a differential value that is spectacular, when city leaders are able to imagine a forward-looking approach, and they are able to share it with the different stakeholders of society, that adds a differential value that is amazing. Because without a forward-looking project, it is very difficult to attract talent, investments. That is why we need a city project. And a city project is not just a general plan. A general plan regulates the use of land. The more consistent, the better. But within this forward-looking project, it needs to be dynamic, powerful, and with great political content. And that is why Madrid can have if Madrid can achieve this forward-looking project, it will have an amazing future. And I see Madrid, and within this effort, when designing Madrid Life, there is a very important point. And it's the size, the scale. Madrid City has 3 million inhabitants. If we make an isochrone map from Madrid, within an hour, there are 7 million people. And if we consider some other city centers that are connected through the high-speed trains, like Segovia or Toledo or Guadalajara, there are 8.6 million people who live in an environment that is within an hour from Madrid city center. And this is a distance that allows you to live and work, to study and go to your school students' hall, to go to nature, enjoy nature. This super city that in the case of Madrid means 8.6 inhabitants, and it would make it the second largest city in continental Europe, gives a very different perspective. And the great advantage is that we have Madrid and the region of Madrid as two institutions that correspond with the functional delimitation, and that makes it easier to make decisions. It allows organizing mobility, urban sprawls, natural environment, etc. There are very few cities in the world that have an infrastructure, a transport infrastructure as powerful. For example, the airport is close to Madrid city center if we compare it to other cities of the same size. We also have 2 high-speed train stations. We have short-distance train station, a network that is very important. And within the M30 road, all this infrastructure goes underground. This makes Madrid one of the few cities in the world that can, within the M30 area, which is a wide space, it's 32 kilometers, and there are 900,000 people living there. This is an excellent territory. Almost all the excellent components of Madrid, an artistic or cultural perspective, are contained within that area. This makes Madrid the great lab for experimenting the mobility of the future. Traditional blocks don't require so much space for the mobility of private vehicles. We can use that for social exchange, for trade, for leisure, and in general, we can maintain ways or motorways, but we can still use an important percentage of the M30 junction for social interactions. We can also implement in smart systems for parking, etc. So within M30, we see a great opportunity as the heart of a metropolitan region that contains 8.6 million inhabitants. Well, you've talked about many key points, and we'll talk a bit more about them later, but if it's okay with you, I will act as the devil's advocate, because we talk about this on many fora, but it is also important to raise some questions when we talk about a comprehensive and ambitious vision of the future. First thing that we have heard, how are we going to evolve towards a more sustainable city in terms of mobility, less dependent on private cars, where we use more public transport, decarbonization, without generating chaos. Because we also need to take into consideration the behaviors of the citizens. But you've already mentioned that Madrid has already implemented infrastructures. But for any manager or political leader, they tend to be very cautious with this. So how can you do this and survive? Well, I think it's a great opportunity. For example, M30 is our first, say, urban highway. But in addition to M30, Madrid has M40, M45, M50. If we go to Barcelona, in Barcelona there's only one ring, which is called B10, and it's the same size as M30, but there's no M40 or 45 or 50. Therefore, it would be very difficult for them to raise an ambitious proposal, unlike in Madrid, where you can combine public spaces, private spaces. If on the M30 you can travel at 80 or 90 kilometers per hour, no buses or pedestrians could circulate there. But M30 has 200 meters, width of 200 meters, La Castellana. The smallest part is 80 meters, so M30 is almost 3 times the size of La Castellana, and there are many options to utilize that space, not just as an urban highway. There in other cities in Europe, there aren't these urban highways like there is in Madrid. And in addition, we have a spectacular transport system, and the fact that cars could circulate at a lower speed is no problem at all. In fact, when there are high pollution levels in Madrid, they reduce the traffic. So the idea is to make it like La Castellana a little bit, and then radial networks that go from M30 to M40. They don't need 120-kilometer access points. This could be boulevards. And we could make Madrid the city of the Eco Boulevard, a zero-emission city. Not just the city center should be zero emissions, the whole region should be zero emissions. And we should also decarbonize other areas. We also have international experience, you and I, in Seoul, in San Francisco, also in Latin America, which is interesting for our audience. Perhaps the project that has been the most successful in reducing mobility in a drastic way was Seoul. It has over 20 million inhabitants. And when Seoul was developing, there was a stream, a river. It's much more smaller than Manzanares River. What we did, we are going to put a platform on top of the stream and build a highway. And of course, since more cars were needed, there was a second way on top of that. So there were like two-story highway, and a mayor recently said, okay, we're going to change the city model. We will disassemble these two motorways that are on top of the stream, and we will recover the stream, and it's called Renaissance. And in 7 kilometers, we've seen now the financial district that has become the most successful in the world. San Francisco also had two-story highway that separated the coastline from the other areas around San Francisco. With an earthquake, the infrastructure collapsed, and they made a referendum, and they made a boulevard. In Boston, around the financial district, there was a two-story highway, and they made a project called PhD, and they're working differently now. And in Latin America, they're making very creative efforts, because perhaps investment in infrastructure is not so high, but they are very, very creative in all capitals. And for example, during the weekend in Mexico, in Bogota, in Santiago de Chile, the main streets become pedestrian. And at that moment, when people meet, when they practice sports, they ride bikes, they move around, this pedestrialization movement has improved in Latin America, but there isn't a collective transport system as developed as in Europe. But I think Madrid could be the great lab for urban mobility solutions for Latin America. The same that Singapore did by making the island an experimental space for airports, for social housing projects, it and then having the possibility to share that with the world. And I think that the potential that Spain has with Latin America in terms of dialogue, language, shared habit, I think that this creates a fantastic opportunity so that this transformative movement of the cities of the future can start in Madrid and then be replicated and shared with other cities. You've mentioned something that I think is somehow unknown, and that is the link between mobility and social cohesion. And I would like you to talk about this. Madrid is a clear case that shows that mobility can solve social cohesion problems. Well, I think that perhaps the best dramatic example of a city that was a mess, that was the cradle of pessimism and problems, and that has become an example in Latin America, is Medellin. We all remember Medellin during the drug trafficking era and how hard it was, and what happened in the last 20-25 years there is fantastic. Today, Medellin is a benchmark in terms of social urban planning, and the project that they made to bring the comunas, which are the less privileged areas, with the river through the creation of a cable car in order to make accessible the access to these underprivileged areas so that they could come into the city and find jobs and work, and also mechanical staircases. All of this was a symbol that mobility and connectivity would allow social integration. This is an example, but in many cities of the world, it is true that without good connectivity, there are very stark imbalances. For example, M30 in Madrid is a physical barrier, but also social barrier, because if we analyze the various districts inside and outside M30, in particular in the south area and the east area, there are important imbalances in terms of income of people who participate in the academia. So transforming M30 in a boulevard will mean a leap forward that will be significant, such as Bilbao as well 25 years ago with the RIA project, the river project. The river was a barrier because ships went into the heart of the city, so no bridges were possible. So when they built the outside bridge and the ships didn't have to come into the heart of the city, they started to connect the two sides of the river. The right part of the river had a social and economic profile very different from the other margin of the river. But integration happened through this river that was used just for ships, but now it is used for leisure, for sports, just as M30 could be that for Madrid. If in the 20th century, train was the protagonist as the means of transport, and followed by the planes, and this affected cities in their competitive models. What will happen in the 21st century? There are lots of discussion about the planes, their environmental impact. How do you see the role of airports and cities in terms of mobility? We've been conducting some research in many cities of the world about the critical competitiveness criteria. What makes a city competitive? And regardless of the way in which you approach this question, you need to take into consideration physical connectivity, airports, ports, highways, railroads, so digital connectivity, and institutional connectivity, that is, institutions and companies that are well connected with the world. This is a fundamental factor for connectivity in cities. And the second factor is the attraction of talent, the capacity to train, to retain and attract talent. These two areas are fundamental. Therefore, airports allow that talent, which is very mobile, can live somewhere but move elsewhere and be perfectly connected. These are the ways to connect cities with the world, and this will continue to be the case. And in Europe, where we have a very firm commitment with high-speed trains, I think it is a very soft solution. it is important to have medium-sized cities in Europe. And in Europe, we have one of the best cities in the world, medium-sized cities, I'm saying. They are competitive without the need of being very big. One goes to Asia or Latin America, and to cities where companies are concentrated or where there's more productivity. These are large cities with lots of these economies of disaggregation. But in Europe, we've managed to have a system with medium-sized cities where the balance between economy and social aspects and environmental aspects works well. And the high-speed train network connecting medium-sized cities is very sustainable with regard to the future. So to give you a break, I will pose a question to myself. How do we fund, how do we pay for this? This is a question that in all the dialogues that we've had is very common. In that sense, we live, Alfonso, a situation that is quite peculiar. Everyone understands how we live in a macro world, low interest rates, capital availability, investments in infrastructure. We have a need to revitalize competitiveness of cities through long-term investments. This doesn't have a single answer. There's no magic bullet. But the good news is that there are many ways to fund productivity in the long term and the attraction of talent in platforms that are most highly developed, which is cities, and have capital available. There are private models, there are public-private models, there are state investments, there are concessions that allow users of an infrastructure are the ones who finance it in the long term. And the good thing is that the development of the capital markets allow long-term investment. This is a reality. In the past, we used to finance to 5-7 years, but now it's 50 or 60 years at very competitive rates. Therefore, and I'm pretty sure that you'll give me your opinion, but it's not that we don't have money. There's enough money to fund this. We need projects to design this project in a competitive way with sustainability into consideration and a way that multiplies value, so that it is also sustainable from the point of view of profitability. I don't know if you want to add on that.
In some cities, they're experimenting with an urban revolution, meaning a change in mobility, the recovery of public spaces, and they're using unconventional formulas until now. For example, apps for transport, for highways, for airports. Because of that, the private sector is investing in public infrastructure, but why not invest in the city itself? Let me give you a hypothesis. The M30. Pedestrians and sustainable mobility will gain more space in the case of Madrid. So what happens if a toll to access, instead of being a parking lot where you come in, you park your car and you pay, you have to pay your ticket, you almost have to study a master's to figure out how to pay for your parking spot. And then once you park, you have to be looking at the watch to make sure that, if you have 5 minutes, they're going to come, the guards are going to come and give you a fine. And then you have to pay attention to see if your car that you're driving into the city, it's a polluting car or not. So there has to be a better management to reach an agreement on how we're going to use public space. Imagine 30 years from now that you have a variable toll with different effects, and then with profits that can be reinvested. For example, now we already need to revitalize our economy, and imagine that they were reinvested to revitalize public space. Spanish companies are some of the best in the world in highway concessions, financing public works, because they have working systems with tax exemptions that are highly sophisticated. So this could be applied not only to highways and airports, but to the heart of the cities. And that raises many possibilities. For the future, there's something you mentioned, which is key: mobility. In the future, the answer is not going to be just to change the vehicles, right? We're not going to have tramways instead of buses and only bikes. No, the idea is to reorganize the city. If we can plan it better, we can reorganize it. For example, Paris is working with the 15-minute cities, so that many of your errands can be done in a small radius of 15 minutes. Or the way houses are owned. If we have more options to rent a house, we can rent a house closer to where we can go to work, to study, or to enjoy our free time. If we have a model of several centers in the city, we could reduce this massive mobility from one end of town to another. Well, this is fascinating. We've already been talking for 30 minutes, and unfortunately we don't have any more time, but I hope you all find it interesting. Thank you again to Madrid Platform, and let's keep going with the program of today's day, which is going to be fascinating without a doubt. Thank you. Thank you to both of you, Adolfo and Alfonso. If I could kindly ask you to leave the stage on the left side. Like they were saying, we have to keep going with this third and last day of Madrid Platform. I told you that we had 13 countries connected, but no. My colleagues have told me that on Monday we had 51 countries that connected. And yesterday we received connections from 44 countries, and I am sure that today we will break a record. Let's see how many countries can connect before today is over. So let's move on. Now we have a series of 20-minute presentations. I would like to ask Mr. Mariano Silveira to come up to the stage. He is the VP of Public Affairs in Cabify. Please give him a round of applause.
Sí, por favor.
Está aquí.
Oh, there he is.
Gracias. Muy buenas.
The stage is yours. Thank you very much. Good morning. I was late, so I need to just take a moment to get my bearings. Thank you very much. Let's begin by taking off our mask. My mask. So, I assume that we all know Cabify. So today the idea is to discuss business models, innovation, technology, and how all of that is having an impact on mobility. And I want to share how we want to transform mobility and make it more sustainable. Let's begin. Speed. This is a crucial concept. At what speed are things changing? I don't know if you can see this slide, and it shows how fast, how the last technological disruptions have reached the famous 50 million user barrier. For the cell phone, it took close to 12 years to reach the 50 million mark. Facebook took 3 years. This graph is not up to date, but TikTok, that app, has been downloaded by more than 1.5 billion people. This figure was achieved in less than 12 months, so changes are accelerated. And this is happening because changes in disruption and technology is bringing closer to solutions and to experiences. And they are better every time. These experiences make our lives more convenient and easier. That's why they are being massively adopted. Certainly, this creation of value, it's happening through platforms. Look, these are all the platforms that were created in 2019. Of course, Cabify is amongst them. And these are the so-called unicorns. They are creating value, and they have received investment rounds of millions of dollars, and they keep growing with double-digit figures. But there's also some reflection happening, because you cannot just grow no matter what. You cannot just grow at any rate. Investors, luckily, are beginning to measure that growth needs to be sustainable, it needs to be paced, and needs to bring positive and sustainable value. We've seen some examples. Some of them are very significant. There is a Chinese city where companies were offering shared bicycle services, and they've grown so out of order that they disappeared. They were thinking that solving the problem of stealing bikes was to just make thousands of bicycles available and that the price would be zero, so that there was no incentive to stealing a bike. And then what happened? At some point, they found themselves with piles and piles and piles, meters high, of bicycles piled on top of each other. And that's where they ended up. So we keep seeing some cases like that. It is not just an issue of just growing at any rate. We need to grow sustainably. And of course, within sustainability, there is profitability. Next slide. So the rise of all these technological platforms and the way the growth is happening is not equal. We see that there is a very high concentration around two axes, which are, of course, the United States and China. The grand majority of tech companies that we know today are concentrated in the United States. Nonetheless, they have a counterpart in China, but we don't know them because most of them do not operate in Europe. But you can be assured they do exist. The United States has its counterpart. And what is happening in Europe, where we're kind of lagging behind? We're feeling a delay in the appearance of, or in the apparition of those large tech companies. Of all unicorns, only 7% are European, and we understand that this has to change because it impacts several transcendental things. One of them is technological sovereignty. If you have a look at your phone and you see the apps that you use on a daily basis and you see where they come from, you'll see that most apps come from companies, if not all of them, are American companies, perhaps with the exception of Cabify. So we can't be depending on companies that come from other countries exclusively. That has some serious implications sometimes. And we're seeing it with electric car batteries, with vaccines, with content creation. We cannot lag behind. This is a clear demonstration of what I was mentioning earlier, the top 5 companies at a world level and how they have evolved in the last almost 20 years. We can see that 20 years ago, the top 5 companies are not on the top ranking today. The great companies today, because of size and value, are all tech companies. You can see them in the bottom line, and they are all American. Apple, Google, Microsoft, Amazon, and Facebook. And these are companies we use every day, which is because they create interactions of value with each of us. They help us solve our needs, and they help us solve friction points that we have. This is food for thought. This transformation and creation of value is very important. The value of these 5 companies together almost triples the 5 companies of 5 years ago. However, this transformation is not happening in Europe, at least not at the same rate. So, what does this have to do with mobility? Well, it has a lot to do with mobility. Let's have a look at innovation and experiences. We are trying to improve mobility from that point of view. This graph shows how we move in the main cities in Spain. Orange is bad and green is good. This has no political implication, but orange means journeys in private cars. We're still highly dependent on private vehicles to move around our cities. This has high implications. Many of them are very serious. If we look at the profile of those trajectories, we end up with this because we know it very well. There is a very low occupation rate or use rate of private cars. Private cars are used between 3 and 5% of the time. It has 5 spots and we only use 1, and it creates an array of negative externalities. This is not something I'm saying or that Cabify is saying. The European Union has quantified these externalities. In other words, every year Europeans spend 800 trillion euros. We are obsessed with the $70 billion of European funds, but we Europeans spend 800 trillion euros from externalities caused by traveling in private cars, in diseases, in pollution, in environmental impact and waste of time. So they are quantified and we have to change. This has to change. Now, this is where technology and innovation connect with mobility. We need to understand mobility from a much more holistic human and behavioral approach. We need to understand why we move like that. Even though it's completely illogical and irrational, it makes no sense to buy a car, being how expensive it is to maintain it. A car costs between 6,000 and 7,000 euros a year, and we buy that to only use it 5% of the time, and we only use 1 of the car seats it has. I think if we thought about it a little closer and from a different perspective, we would realize how ridiculous this decision might be. But then there is a behavioral analysis that shows why we are still so dependent on our private cars. And for that, we need to understand these interactions. So these transactions, the use of a car instead of a bus, or calling a Cabify, or renting a movie, or turning on your TV and going on Netflix. All of these behaviors can be measured and analyzed from the customer journey perspective. And this can be looked at as a series of opportunities and things that happen along the experience. And it can cause, I don't know, experience or anxiety or points of friction or points of contact. And they can be turned into a much more positive experience that can end up in a good rating or in a recommendation. So the user might recommend that brand amongst our closest circle, which is what we as a brand want. Or it can end up as a very negative experience, and well, we'll keep consuming then that negative service, but as soon as there's a better one, we'll stop consuming. So why do we keep using our own car? Well, because until now, the experience has been unbeatable, or almost. Maybe not unbeatable, but very difficult to equal. Why? Well, because your car is at your door. For us, time is our most valuable resource. We think that my car is free because we don't really analyze how much that journey costs, and I don't really calculate how much time I'm wasting in traffic or how much I'm polluting. I just think that this is the most convenient possibility because my car is parked at my front door and I don't have to share my journey with anyone, and I can do whatever I want. So it's convenience, advantages behind using my own car. This is what makes people use their car for 30 to 40% of their journeys. Then, until now, taxis have been a wonderful idea for decades, and it is transforming and becoming a relevant actor. Well, they've always been relevant. But if we look at it from an experience point of view, we'll see why it's been so difficult to become an alternative to people stopping using their own cars and choosing other alternatives. If we see the evolution of private cars, we'll see that they won't stop growing, unlike the taxi. And this has an explanation. So imagine you buy a car, you sign the mortgage at the bank, and they tell you, look, this field of price is going to be left blank. So go ahead and move into your new home and come back in 6 months. So when you come back in 6 months, instead of 300,000 euros, will cost you 600,000 euros. And then you say, like, what? I already moved. So this is more or less what had been happening with the taxi a few years ago. This was a commercial transaction where one of the main variables was an unknown. A few years ago, you got on a cab and you didn't know how much money you were going to pay until you reached your destination. And this is key, because in order to assess the information and make a decision to whether I'm going to take a cab or not, I need to know the variables that I can't control. You would never buy a new house without knowing how much it costs. Well, this is one of the main reasons that have made it difficult for taxis to become an alternative instead of private cars. Now, the good news is that this is changing because of technology. And experience is not the only variable. There are other variables. There is the symmetry of information in gaming theory. I don't know if you know it, but there is a series of incentives that makes things to not happen. Imagine you have a series of taxis at the T4 at the airport parked, and then you have 1,000 pedestrians in Madrid looking for a cab, and both never meet. So imagine that there is a taxi or an Uber that want to offer a service, needs to meet the person who's looking for a way to travel. Well, in this gaming theory, technology makes it easier for users and providers to meet at one point. Users like us are getting used to not going out to look for things. We want things to come to us. We want the experience to come to us, and it has to be convenient. Talking about the symmetry of information, let me show you. This is the bus network of the city of Barcelona. How difficult can it be to plan this? And how technology could help us to have all this information, all this know-how, this infrastructure, these resources could be translated into a click, a single click. From a technological point of view, this is incredibly complex. But if I'm in Barcelona and I want to move from point A to point B, I cannot have a mental map like this in my head. I need to have a simplified experience that is as intuitive as possible so that I can find out in a very simple way what to do and move from point A to point B as simply as possible. And this is where technology appears and transforms things. We were talking about price. If I get in a car, I don't know how long it's going to take to come and get me and how long my journey is going to take. Well, this is one of the things that technology has been transforming for a while, transforming the pain points in the experience that cause us to choose one thing over another. So the idea is that technology brings them to the forefront of the decision-making process so that we as users know we can have these variables under control so that we can choose one experience instead of another, so that we can make a decision with our variables under control and that we can enjoy from the experience differently. This is where technology is clearly having an impact on mobility ecosystems in the cities. This is the case of Cabify. We simplify to the max what the technological experience is going to be. We bring you the variables to the beginning, and so it makes you feel under control of the experience. This is the path that we give you. When you leave a Cabify, you don't feel that you're paying. You don't feel the friction in the experience. Of course, you paid for the service. You just leave. You don't have to open your purse and take out your wallet and bring out the cash. No, all of those things are already solved. This, of course, translates into taxis and our tourism vehicles with drivers, or VTCs, and into other vehicles as well, like scooters, taxis, car sharing. We have endless options, but the idea is, how do we make it easier for the user to choose, to pick, to decide whenever they want to interact as a brand or with the brand as a user? When you want to move from one point to another, how can we make it easier for you? Because moving in a city is very complex, so how can we simplify it for you? Whether it is taking a cab or a tourist vehicle with driver, or scooter, or car sharing. Maybe what you are deciding is to deliver a package and to do last mile delivery, which is what we started to do last year in the logistics sector.
¿Y qué pasa con el futuro? Bueno, yo aquí quizás voy a hacer una confesión. Yo tengo 3 hijos.
I have three kids. The youngest one is 3 years old, and she likes the 80s. So I share many things with her, from music to movies. So we are doing a revival from the past. And the other day we watched Back to the Future 2. So Robert Zemeckis, who was the director, back in 1985 was visualizing the future, which was 2015, as flying cars. I don't know if you've seen Back to the Future. And maybe you remember that Dr. Brown drove this car on an air highway. Crazy stuff. It's great to imagine cars driving and flying in 3D, but not before going through autonomous driving and algorithms. It just has too many implications. In reality, I think we all know where we have to go in the future. So in the last few minutes of my presentation, I would like to discuss how we can start gearing towards that future so that it can become a reality. We have to lead the transformation. So, not only the what we want to transform and the why we want to transform it becomes relevant, but also the how we're going to transform mobility. This is a matter of purpose and of significance. It doesn't matter if you're a startup of a large company. In the end, we're all people. We're all a group of people. This is how Cabify was born 10 years ago. This year is our 10th year anniversary, but in the end we're a group of people with inspiration, which is trying to build something that transforms things. It doesn't matter whether you are in the private or public sector. The idea is to be faithful to the original purpose and to want to transform people's lives. City's quality of life has to change. We cannot be breathing this same air. It can't be possible that 40% of public space is taken up by cars that nobody uses. And if we think about it, we've been discussing this for years and very little has happened. We might think the transformations have been huge, but not really. We cannot sustain this pace of transformation because we don't have a plan B and because we're running out of time. First of all, we need to understand that we are part of the problem so that we can become part of the solution. We must understand that transportation is, to a good extent, highly responsible for most CO2 emissions. So we need to understand this and start changing things. As users, we need to start making more responsible decisions. Stop depending so much on our private vehicles and maybe use all the alternatives in the mobility ecosystem that we have available. This means we need to be in line with SDGs, we need to be in line with the Green Deal, and with all the directives that are very clear for Europe and for Spain. This is great, but we need to be in line with that because we haven't done it. At least not until now. Do you know how many companies nowadays are 100% carbon neutral? Less than 1%. And one of our goals is to go carbon neutral by 2050. How are we going to do it if we don't manage to step on the accelerator of this transformation? We talk about our impact as users, businesses, governments. This is key. It's not the same to become carbon neutral in 2030 or in 2050. Cabify has been carbon neutral since 2018. We've compensated more than 300,000 tons by the million trips that we have done in the world. Technology before wouldn't allow us to do that, but now it does, because now through blockchain we measure and track all of the emissions we generate. It takes a lot of effort and it takes a lot of resources to do this assessment, but we understand it is the only way to become carbon neutral. And we not only want to compensate, in fact, we want to stop compensating. What we want to do is to not emit anymore. This is why we're looking into transforming our entire fleet, our entire car park on our platform to become zero-emission vehicles. It cannot be the same to be carbon neutral and then to have 2 million people who need mobility and cannot access to it. They have certain alternatives, but somehow there is a technological barrier that keeps them from being able to access that mobility, those alternatives. So now Cabify has become it's transformed to become accessible for the blind or for the hard of hearing so that they can access technology and alternatives. To finish, innovation, agility. We were talking about the speed for change and the speed that we need for this transformation. We really have no excuse. Why in Norway 60% of cars are zero emissions and in Spain the percentage is laughable? What do they have that we don't? Simply that they have aligned. They have all agreed. They have identified what they needed to do for things to change and for transformation to come about. And here we're still discussing things that are not going to go anywhere. I can give you endless examples. We have city halls that can't agree and who hire different bicycle sharing services, and then you come and you have to park your bicycle here because then there's a municipal line that divides this street with the other one, and then in the other side of the street there is a different bicycle sharing service. And, mobility is like COVID. It doesn't understand where the lines in the city have been traced. Why fragment and segment and fill the regulations to complicate things more than ever? In the newspaper, in the last few years, the amount of regulations has been multiplied by 4, and that regulation clearly has not been effective because we see the level of conflict. Everything is going to court, to different levels of court. So we must be doing something wrong for most regulations to end up being trialed in court. So perhaps we should first agree, look for consensus, talk to each other in something as transcendental as mobility or as climate change, and then regulate. First agree and then regulate. In the case of car hire services with driver, we have a royal decree, and if nothing changes by next year, there will be no more cars hired with driver. And then we have another initiative to promote technology and accessibility and mobility, so we really need to reach an agreement. If we, as a country, have identified that security and safety and highway accidents are very serious things, the Directorate of Traffic and Transit is always talking about the complexity and the responsibilities and the complexity of regulations, and we managed to reach an agreement on the fact that security and safety was key, And no one questions when the DGT, when the Traffic Directorate decides to do something. So how can a body as the DGT manages to do something important? Well, it's because we know our life depends on it. But then when it comes to installing electric chargers and promoting investment in zero-emission vehicles and technology for platforms of mobility as a service, we can't agree on that. And as soon as something arises, there are endless regulations that arise, and they are good for nothing. All they do is stop innovation. So we really need to work with the private and public sector. We need to reach an agreement, and we need to understand that change is good. Change is a good thing. It is positive. We cannot solve challenges like the ones we have in front of us, like climate change, with solutions from the past. Because the solutions we were adopting in the past are the ones that led us here, which is an unsustainable situation. We need to understand that we need to do things differently. We can't keep using the same solutions that we were using before. We need new solutions, new approaches, innovation, technology, dialogue, collaboration. We must choose a new speed. It cannot be the fastest, but it cannot be the slowest one either. We need to reach consensus, sit together, talk, collaborate. Transformation is really necessary, and we really don't have a plan B, and we need to live better in our cities. Let's begin to talk. Let's begin the dialogue, because we all need it. Thank you very much.
Muchísimas gracias, Mariano.
Thank you very much, Mariana. And it's quite shocking, your presentation, quite amazing. I was looking from behind the scenes, one of the images that you showed in this traffic jam. This is something that we see in Madrid every day. And of course, something needs to be done regarding sustainable mobility in large cities. It is a pleasure for me to present and to ask Mr. Juan Corro to the stage. He's Head of Technology of the Municipal Transport Authority, EMT, here in Madrid. The clicker is just below. Well, I don't know if you can hear me well. Good morning, everyone. And early morning to those who watch us from the other half of the world. Waking up in early morning just to listen to what we have to say is a great responsibility, so I hope I keep you awake. I'm Juan Torres. I'm head of Technology and Innovation of the Municipal Transport Authority of Madrid. We're fundamentally this regular urban transport service of the city of Madrid, and we also provide other services that are making us an integrated mobility provider. We provide shared bicycle services such as BiciMat. We also provide over 10,000 parking spaces. We are a 100% municipal company. We are part of the city council. In the past, we share ownership with the region of Madrid, but now we're 100% in the city council. So I was saying we have 10,000 parking spaces that are directly managed by the EMT. We also have a more tourist-oriented service, which is a cable car, and we also have towing services that doesn't have as many fans. But I'm going to talk about PPP within urban mobility and sustainability with a forward-looking approach. They have asked me to refrain from giving you headlines or ads and talk about specific examples. And we're going to talk about what we've done in the EMT and what we've learned since then. So a case of PPP that was quite interesting for us is, well, we don't have buses. So what do we need? I'm sorry, we have buses. So what do we need? We need storage spaces for those buses that are called operation centers. They provide support services. They allow fueling, providing fueling services, repairs, maintenance, etc. So EMT Madrid was the first large mobility operator that decided to make one of its centers 100% gas operated. We went from gas and fuel, we went from fuel to gas because it reduced emissions significantly. What did the EMT know about gas? Well, not much. We knew how to drive buses and repair buses, but managing gas infrastructures was a different story. So what did we do? We created the first operation center in Centenario, in the northern area of Madrid, that operated fully with gas. What we did was come to an agreement with a company specialized in gas and provide this gas fueling services. And we did so through a concessionaire, which gave us great efficiency. What else did we do? Since we already had a footprint in the city, what we did is we also created a new high infrastructure and a bridge that would allow private cars to come in and use that infrastructure built by the EMT through this concession and PPP for universal access. And today, this was the first operation center operating with gas in Europe, and now we have 6 operation centers where gas is also used. But Centenario remains the most efficient center in terms of cost when compared to the rest of centers. These kind of experiences are the ones that encourage us when we have challenges ahead of us, challenges that could be technical or of any other nature. These are the challenges that allow us to share the effort, share the burdens, but also allow us to open to society. That's what we learned when we made this Centenario effort, and now we are in a different project. We want to design a similar facility in the south of Madrid in Entrevías, and we need to see what the right or the proper solutions are to be able to create an infrastructure to provide hydrogen fuel services for our buses, for our fleets in the future. This will be the last year that we will buy gas-operated buses. We will discard the diesel-operated vehicles, and we will choose either electric buses, which we've already started buying, and hydrogen-operated buses. What other areas for collaboration do we see, and where we see lots of discussions going on? Well, in all things related to technology. I'm the head of technology, and I'm really proud to say that we just launched an app called Madrid Mobility 360. It's an integrated app for the city of Madrid with a multi-mode planner that is quite powerful, that includes all types of public transport, also taxis, private cars with drivers, shared systems, car sharing systems, bike sharing systems, and you can reserve or book EMT services, and we're trying to integrate other operators. Where are the opportunities for collaboration in an environment like this? Well, we see that there are challenges for transactions, and coming to an agreement with someone is kind of complicated. There are a lot of obstacles to face. Where did we find the most important problems? Well, in coming to an agreement and finding long-term commitments. Here we are in Madrid platform, where there are two sides in different continents that found this platform to come together. And here, we've seen that the same phenomenon happens. People are generally afraid of what I call the booking syndrome. When Booking.com started with hotels, if you had a hotel, then a person from Booking.com came to your hotel and told you, well, I'm going to bring you some Swedish, some Finnish, and you were super happy because this person brought me clients. So what happens when your operations depend on the bookings from a company? Well, and they are putting some commissions in between. Well, we're less happy. So when we talk about integrating platforms for mobility, people fear or are a bit reluctant because they don't know what's at stake. So what are we learning as we do? One, we need to set clear principles when one establishes rules of engagement that are clear and basic principles for coexistence and for convenience, and you speak clearly, things are easier. We're integrated our platform, third-party companies, together with our services. And we are doing the same with third-party providers as well. We're providing services that are user-centric, where we share data, we share users. We need to find transparency and inclusion criteria, and all these criteria have been present for a long time. And we are implementing that. So first problem, basic principles that everyone should agree upon. Second challenge, technical issues. Use technology and replicate it 1,000 times is terrible, and it's not a bad idea. If Madrid designs a platform, and then Helsinki makes another one, and Madrid and Bilbao, we are all doing the same job and duplicating efforts. And every time we do an integration, for example, a shared car in Madrid and Barcelona and London, what happens? Well, there are lots of expenditure that don't give any added value. So there, we could really work because friction and integrating costs are being borne by everyone. So there's room for improvement from the point of view of PPP. And we do that because we like to be very self-sufficient, like to do things ourselves. And so we need to share the burden because this system is not working, because the investments that are coming become unmanageable. And so the problem that we have is similar to the problem that have other private and public operators. So there's an opportunity there in everything that has to do with technology and everything that has to do with sharing technology and sharing costs. That's where I see room for improvement. And again, the experience that we've done so far helps. Madrid is a benchmark. In 1985, we created the EMT, and the transport system became harmonized through a similar regulatory umbrella. We, as operators, we do what the regional general planning orders. We participate in the consortium, but also the regional government and the ministry, and amongst all, we come together and talk about what the sustainability measures should be, long-term plans for transforming the lines, and there's a lot of PPP there because there are many lines that are under a concession scheme with small, medium, and large operators, and also state-owned operators like Metro. And with this integrating experience of putting our will to create a comprehensive transport system that is very comfortable for Madrid citizens, because with one card you can use many modes of transport, this is very useful. And we need to think about that. And this was actually one of the questions that was raised to me when they asked me to participate. What's next? How can we evolve in terms of regulation and of investment when we see in terms of comparative law what is being done in Europe, and we look at regulations? Now we have some regulations, and Madrid will review its mobility regulations, the same in Europe. This is a mess, but then we come to agreement, we need to implement them, and we do so through regulations. So when we establish a comparison and we see the Finnish model, which is considered one of the success cases because it's a law that makes all operators be part of all the transport options without restrictions, or the French model that is a more recent model from December 2019. What does the French law do? And it's inspiring the rest of countries. Let's establish digital ticketing. But at the same time, we need to upgrade our regulation. So, if we remember our creation, we need to also incorporate other modes of transport under the same umbrella: car sharing services, bike sharing services, drones, autonomous cars, and whatever comes with technology and with the human wit. So the French law, what they're doing is they have regional transport consortia, but that they should integrate all types of transport, and they all require our participation for finding solutions. And there we have a lot of room for improvement again. And I would like to stress the value of regulation, because, of course, I work in the public sector. This is my disclaimer. Everyone says, well, you know, regulations have multiplied. Mariana was just saying that recently. This is not working. But I wanted to talk about a report from a former member state, the UK, which recently launched its bus strategy. That is, going back to the bus is better. And I will publish this on my Twitter account later if you want the reference. But they talk about the deregulation model in '86 in the UK. From then on, they said everyone can create a line from wherever to wherever and do whatever they want. The most profitable lines are, of course, overpopulated, but the least profitable are abandoned. So this is not working. And if we compare the non-London model, where we see that the use of public transport decreases and the use of cars increases, in London, when they changed the regulation and started taking into consideration mobility solutions, they now have a model in which the use of private car is going down and the use of public transport is going up. So deregulation meant that the most profitable lines are overpopulated and vice versa. And so, with the discovery or rediscovery of consortia, they now realize that they need to regulate. And so, what we need to do is to come to agreements and move away from these lawless territory that will help us save lots of problems. So PPP in the future and the upcoming regulation, both of them are based on sharing all these challenges that we have ahead, so that the private sector comes with us. We're talking about fuel, about electricity, smart charging, because charging 400 electric buses is no easy task. That's clear. We cannot do that. Imagine the expenditure, the costs, if there's an excessive demand. All of these areas we need to take into consideration, and we need to find smart charging solutions. We have our 10,000 parking spaces, and we have other open spaces. Next year, we will have all our parking spaces with electric chargers. The Madrid City Council is also encouraging the call for an open space to provide electric charging options. And so all the technology that we've already developed should not just stay with us. We need to share that, and we need to expand that and replicate it, because there's one thing that I always say in these forums and these interventions. I don't know if you remember Gladiator, the movie, where Maximus is in the Roman circus. He's a gladiator, and once he's captured, you see the scene, and we start seeing a battle, and he's going to be attacked, and he turns around and he asks, have you been in the army? Our chances for survival are just working together. And that's what happens with mobility. The great agents that are coming into the urban sustainability and mobility scheme are everyone. Car manufacturers, the big technology companies, in addition to Uber and Cabify, they're all coming into mobility. So this will be very, very big. So we cannot live in our own little world. Either we come together and share technologies, or we're going to buy technologies from different suppliers with all the problems that this would entail. And we embrace public-private participation, but under the governance by design approach. A little bit similar to the privacy by design approach. If I work in the telecommunication system, it's a line of thought that said, that established that thinking about abstract elements from the point of view of technology is not quite useful. This means I only have 1 minute left. I want to respect the time that was allocated. So, governance by design. What we learned from governance by design was that if we want to guarantee privacy when we don't have technologies that provide that possibility, is a problem, and we start creating layers and emulators, but there are many shortcomings and many gaps, and that is the same thing that happens with the governance of mobility. If we make mobility as a service, or and we have solutions for assisting passengers or operators without taking into consideration other factors, it is not going to work. So we propose that all tools need to be automated, updated, powerful, so that they help improve the city, to make all these possibilities that the first dialogue talked about possible. In the end, what our work is to be at the service of citizens. Thank you very much, and good morning, everyone. Well, thank you very much, Juan. And now I invite Juan Alfaro, head of the Transport and Mobility Unit at Deloitte, and Andrés Camacho Donesar, head of Mobility. I will ask you please to come to the stage. Big round of applause for them, please. Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Juan, for coming to the last event within this mobility block within Madrid platform. And we wanted to invite Juan because, in addition to being the head of Transport and Mobility Unit at Deloitte, Juan has a really wide experience in the public sector, where he's held important positions. He was director of Renfe. He was also president of the Land Infrastructure Organization, and he worked in the Madrid City Council as head of the PPP office. So when we talk about PPP, Juan is one of the most prominent voices due to his long experience, and also because he works in the private sector now. So Juan, thank you for coming. First question that I wanted to raise, a little bit in line with what Juan Corro mentioned, is we talk a lot about PPP, and there's a lot of buzz going on, but how would you define it? What are the elements that make up public-private partnerships? Good morning, everyone, and first of all, I would like to thank you, Andrés, and I would like to thank Madrid Platform for the invitation to talk with you and share some ideas and some thoughts. Public-private partnership here in Spain and in other countries has a stigma, and it has to do with the improper use of PPP. So we will start by defining what public-private partnership is not. It is not a system to elude that some services impact the budget. This is something that has been historically done in some countries, in some regions, for some projects, and this has raised understanding problems with regard to what public-private partnership is. And in fact, there are many countries that have been put to a halt due to this capital sin of this improper use. To me, public-private partnership, or PPP, refers to two fundamental issues. Of course, there's a collaboration between the public and private sector that shares risks and benefits, not always just of an economic nature. And this collaboration should be long-term. We're talking about long-term projects. So, traditionally, we have understood PPP as a contractual collaboration that is regulated by the law and contracts on public sector here in Spain, and there was actually a specific PPP contract, but as a concept, what was called the concession contract, or the contract for the exploitation of a service. That is one type of PPP to create infrastructure, to deliver services, where the public and the private sector come together to launch the project. You share funding, risks, operations, the future, and the evolution of that business. But in addition to this public-private collaboration under a contract, there is a more institutional collaboration that has to do more with sharing. And it's what we've been doing here in these last few days. That means we bring together a number of concerns for the public and the private sector. In particular, we're in the vertical of mobility today, tomorrow, and in the future. And from there, the idea is to collaborate, to establish solutions, and provide new ideas that can help us, that through this PPP, citizens, or each one of us, we all have better solutions to move around in the urban and in the metropolitan or in the long-distance realm. To me, PPP has to do with that, and it also has many components and angles. Juan Corro mentioned before the concept of technology, which is key in the PPP approach, the idea of sharing and co-investing and risking. There are many angles from which we can look at this, but mainly it's about this, from my perspective. And now, talking about public transport, this new mobility that implies, that entails profound technological changes. For example, the autonomous vehicle that will come in the future and will be a revolution. How do you see public transport and the public sector and its ability to adapt to this new reality? Some go faster than others, but I think that the most important is yet to come. The future of mobility implies a number of fundamental decisions. You mentioned the autonomous cars, or the car that we drive privately, our own cars or shared cars. We talk about the source for fueling those cars. There are many drivers that are encouraging change, and the pace of that change will make public operators, for example, like the EMT or Metro, and in other cities it's the same model. This all will require that operators change. The demands of citizens and the needs of citizens change over time, and the car-sharing companies or motor-sharing companies or skateboard-sharing companies are growing in cities. If we don't take into account the COVID pandemic, but they're increasing their presence significantly, and this is all making that private car uses has reduced, but the use of public transport, depending on how it integrates within the mobility area, we could see a decrease or an increase in the use of public transport. And so public transport should be agile enough to adapt to all those changes. Public administration in general, and I say this having worked at the public administration doesn't work, is not very fast, not due to a lack of initiative or qualification. It is slow because, by definition, the public administration favors stability and guarantees, and this requires some timelines. And so the public administration is also very heterogeneous, and so there are a number of cases in which there have been some impressive achievements, and we have the other side of the spectrum where we've been hearing about things that never crystallize. I think that public transport companies have a challenge ahead of them that is huge to see what they want to do when they grow up. First, they have to define what their strategic position is in terms of what mobility is today and where they want to go and where they want to be. Perhaps they want to be in many other verticals or participate in other verticals or remain in their own vertical. Perhaps they want to transform themselves in terms of energy. There are many factors to take into account, and the greatest public transport companies in Spain are on that reflection process. They are designing their strategic plans and thinking about that, what we are today and what we are going to be tomorrow and in the future. And from there, we need to establish the mechanisms and the agility that is necessary so that they achieve their goals in the optimal time frame, because if you're late for a project, it's just like if you're not there, and without losing sight of efficiency and effectiveness as a main driver.
We also have the mechanism of Nexium funds. Public and private companies can put forward transformation projects. What type of mobility projects have you seen and that you think will have traction, that will make sense? Are there any examples of private and public partnerships in this sense? In Deloitte and in many other firms, we believe that next generation is a great opportunity for many industries and sectors, as long as we bear in mind that there are a series of requisites to be fulfilled for next generation to work, meaning not to or avoid not implementing all the budget and then using that money for other different, although similar, purposes than what they were meant to do initially. So next generation has many pillars that we know, sustainability, for example, territorial cohesion, which is very important for mobility. There are many transportation companies and public or local governments that have tried to take advantage of those funds and then drive things forward to have a real impact on employment, on services, on company transformation, on adding real value. We have seen that railway companies and airlines are well positioned. They have two main objectives in mind: digital transformation, the traveler's experience, trip applications, and digitalization of trips and journeys. And they're not only looking into external digitalization, but also internal. They are transforming their own maintenance operations, fleet maintenance, etc. Then they are taking steps as well to other types of transportation with cleaner fuels. I was saying that the municipal transportation company is looking into biofuel, into having electric buses. And then airplanes are considering what their future is going to be. Right now, they're paying a very high price in terms of sustainability and the environment because they keep using fossil fuels. There are some pilot tests out there to explore hydrogen and electric power for airplanes. This is for long-haul vehicles. Now, in terms of maritime transport, there are some projects for both transport and for ports. Railway infrastructures are also seeing some proposals. In Spain, the administrator of railway infrastructures called ADIF is having some proposals that could be financed by Next Generation. Now, in the metropolitan or urban framework, once again going back to the pillars of sustainability and digitalization, I think there are fleets and car parks that are being transformed to use cleaner energy, and that replacement of vehicles itself can be partially financed by Next Generation. Then there's everything having to do with the recharging infrastructures. If we all moved to having electric parks, how would we recharge our cars? Do we have enough infrastructure? What kind of power capacity would we need, and how do we balance supply and demand? Then there are apps and transport digitalization in cities, and this, of course, could also be financed by Next Generation. When we work with a client, we start going through a very long list. We do some brainstorming when putting forward projects without really setting too many limits. And then this list ends up in a short list of 2 or 3 large projects, mostly centered on what I just said. Then there are specificities, right? If we talk about metro or the train, we talk about an intelligent and connected metro station, for example. We address operators' efficiency that are coming into a liberalized market like in Spain. 4 years ago, we started having a new operator in railway services. And we're also talking about recharge points that are quicker and more efficient, both on highways and in underground parking lots, because that is necessary to really roll out full electric car parks. So there are many things to develop within the framework of Next Generation. But even without Next Generation, those projects would make sense on their own. One of the benefits of a reflection process in mobility is that, in the end, only things that make sense see the light of day. So as a country, let's take advantage of Next Generation's financing and use it for things that make sense. And the best sample, or the best proof that things make sense, is that even without next generation, things would happen. Next Generation is being an accelerator, but we shouldn't use it to do things that had never been planned. There are some examples in recent history that we should not repeat. Through expressions of interests, you have received thousands and thousands of projects. Have you seen any mixed projects? Some PPPs, whether it is local, regional administrations with companies or not so much? We've seen all kinds of things. So we have public and private clients. Besides having local governments or administrations, we have public companies as well. They each have their own projects, but then there are some others in which public and private collaboration is key. In fact, when the next generation concept was created, PPP was already considered in order to leverage those funds through private initiatives. I think the projects that are giving more value and have more possibilities of being successful and of being eligible are the ones that bring together different company sectors and public administration, because I think collaboration enriches projects, and I think those will become more viable projects than the ones that, although legitimate, only have certain companies or certain administrations but are very vertical. I am sure some of those will see the light of day because they make sense. But part of the DNA of Next Generation is PPPs with diversity as well. Diversity in sectors and diversity in the size of companies. In terms of mobility, like it's been said before, the ecosystem is so wide that when we use this word, mobility, well, we are talking about energy companies. In the future, they have to change. We have infrastructure companies. Why? Because we will need new infrastructures for the new mobility. It also involves financial and insurance institutions, financing institutions because someone has to pay for this, and insurance companies because, well, we were talking about autonomous driving or self-driving cars. So what would be the contractual implications with a driverless car if there is an accident? Who is responsible for the crash? The owner of the car, the maker of the car, the software developer of the car, whomever had issues with the data? All of this has to do with the new mobility. The public administration plays a role here as well. Local government needs to be a regulator, and it has to be an efficient regulator. And there has to be regulation because an urban and metropolitan environment, the use of public space by all sharing vehicles needs to be regulated, and it needs to be homogenized all over the country, not only in one municipality or in one city. Then, in the future, multimedia companies will be very relevant as well. Because if we talk about driverless cars, what are we going to do when we're riding in a car? Maybe work, but maybe those vehicles should be able to show content. And then there is the cyber layer, software operating systems, expectation management, data, mobility as a service, all of that. The cyber layer also has to do with mobility. So when we talk about mobility projects, we are really implying lots of different industries that need to make their contribution to push the evolution forward. So the traditional value chain of mobility, that of car makers, is blowing up in the air. And that affects other sectors like insurance. So what do you do with insurance with autonomous cars? It'll change radically. But even before driverless cars, because with car sharing, we're seeing different types of insurance, and we're seeing it in Ferrovial. We have to adapt our business models, and it is not an easy task. Because, well, as companies, we also have our own momentum and we have our own red lines. Well, in fact, the automotive sector is positioning itself as a shareholder. Ferrovial has some car companies, and there are others because they are taking those steps. Maybe the future of mobility for an automotive company is not about selling cars. Maybe it is about making them and making them available for users, because as we know, in average, we use, or many of us use cars only an hour a day in average. So does it make sense to own many cars? Some families own 2 or 3 cars and they only use them for an hour a day. I think younger generations are very clear about this, you know. The idea of getting your driver's license when you were 18, it was crucial for us. It's changing in younger generations. I can assure you that my son's priorities, he's 18 years old, do not really include getting a driver's license. They have different perceptions and different expectations. Juan, I wanted to ask you about platforms of mobility as a service, MaaS. I think they should be an example of PPPs, because in the end, for a platform to make sense, it should integrate public transportation. And when it is integrated, public transportation becomes more efficient and is used massively. Although everyone agrees on the fact that it needs to happen, in reality, today, there are many initiatives on the table, and they all fail if we measure success from an economic point of view. So what would be your opinion about these MaaS platforms? How do you think they'll evolve? Well, we could analyze this from different points of view. It is true that they haven't enjoyed enormous economic success. The first thing has to do with their functionality. So let's take a step back. The concept of mobility as a service is that we, as users, care less every time the mode or how we're going to get there. What we care about is how I am going to go from here in Cibeles to my Deloitte office. And I don't really care if I take a taxi or a cab, or if I get a proposal that tells me walk to the metro station and then go. That is for short trips. And in long trips, I need to know if I'm going to take a train to get to the airport, and then I'm going to take a plane, and then I'm going to get off and then get on another train and then take a taxi because I'm going to a meeting. So having a one-stop shop, a whole solution for my mobility problem needs to come in one platform. For that, a platform should comply with 4 functions that I think are important. First one, planning. The platform needs to have perfect planning so that I can plan my options and then I can choose what is the best one for me. That is more or less under control. The second function that you need to be able to do is to reserve, to book. I would like to book my means of transport with one click. And then I also need to make sure that there will be continuity from the moment I start my trip. The next function is having a single ticket. Whether I want to use a public bus or the metro or a car sharing or an Uber or whatever. And I want to have that on my phone instead of having to go then to the platforms of each one of the service providers where I need to log on and then purchase a ticket and then log out and then go to the next one. And then the last function is paying. There is no platform that can offer all of these options yet together. There are some that do it better and some that do others better and worse. The next issue is how many modes can I access in one single platform? And this has to do with public, but also with private options. Whether it is sharing as well, if car, motor, bike sharing, and rented cars with a driver or private cars with drivers and how they integrate. But now there is a bit of friction when it comes to integration. And then here, public transport must integrate it too, because like you were saying, that's how mobility as a service makes sense. In urban settings and metropolitan settings, public transport is crucial because users make use of it. But also in long-haul transport, it is important, so they have to be included. But you have to integrate public transportation in the entire journey. And this doesn't mean to only buy your single ticket for your bus trip. What I mean is that if there are consortiums, those consortiums need to be included in the platform as well. And last, there's data. Who owns all the data on the platform? All of this will be easier to solve with public-private partnerships, and there is still a long way to go. I think that the future of mobility as a service really depends on platforms. Thank you, Juan. We are out of time. Let's keep talking with or over a cup of coffee and off cameras. But thank you so much for sharing your experience and expertise with us. Thank you for being here today. Thank you. Thank you very much to the two of you. I will now invite you to leave the stage. And now we will keep going, but I need to ask all of you who are present in the auditorium that we leave the room because, as you know, it is time to disinfect. Our partners from Democratest have been in charge of implementing our COVID protocol. We will be back at noon on the dot with the Forum for International.